We have a question now from social media. Steven Pinker was one of the speakers of this event, Fronteiras do Pensamento, this year, and he sees a decrease in violence in our society throughout history. And he claims that this is a trend. So do you believe that we live in a less violent society? Is Homo sapiens less violent today than it was in the past?
Absolutely. I completely agree with Pinker about the past and the present. The future is a different matter. I'm not so sure about that. But if you look at the world of the early 21st century, this is the most peaceful era in human history. Now, I don't mean to say that there is no violence. Of course there is violence. I live in Israel, I live in the Middle East, I know there is war, there is occupation, there is conflict, but less than in any previous time in history. Today, for the first time in history, you have a greater chance of dying from eating too much than from being killed by some other human being in violence. Millions of people die each year from illnesses related to obesity and to diabetes, whereas the number of people who die from violence is much, much smaller. If you look, for instance, at budgets of countries, for most of history, the biggest item on the budget of every kingdom and empire was the army, paying for soldiers, for fortresses, for weapons. This was maybe half the budget, maybe even more. Today in the world, the defense budget of most countries is just around 2% or less. That's amazing. That's a huge achievement for humankind. We spend much more on education, on healthcare, on welfare than we do on the armies. So I agree with Pinker on that. But when I look to the future, it doesn't make me feel secure, because you know what created this era of peace wasn't a miracle from heaven, and it wasn't a change in the laws of nature. It was human decisions. Humans making good decisions. And if we start making bad decisions, we can go back to the era of violence. When I now look at, say, the tensions rising between China and the United States and what's happening with Taiwan and all that, I'm frightened. People got used to the era of peace. They don't realize it. They think the world is violence, but they don't realize how much more violent the world can be. And therefore they are careless. Instead of doing everything in our power to preserve the achievements of the past generations, to preserve the fragile peace, we are neglecting the order, the global order that secured this peace. And if we aren't careful, we can find ourselves back in this jungle of war and violence. And given the technologies of the 21st century, the Third World War will be even worse than the previous two wars.